Well, good morning, Greg.
Good morning.
It's good to be here with you today. It is March 29th of 2019, and I'm here with Greg Hext, CEO of Chapman Hext & Company. And Greg, I'm delighted to be here with you this morning.
It's nice to be here. We're delighted.
Well, we've talked about doing a video like this in the past, Greg, and it's always brought a little bit of enthusiasm out in both of us. So I thought, well, what better time than the present than
Absolutely.
to capture it today, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know, Greg, that both of us have been blessed with clients who are getting at that stage in the evolution of their business where they're thinking about passing it on to the next level. And so our conversation today will be, to a great degree, focused on helping companies get prepared to either sell their business or to pass it on to the next generation or whatever the case may be that's appropriate for them. And I know you have a lot of experience at that.
We do. We're like you. We're blessed to have a lot of clients that have, I'm calling it aging out over time, or they've been fruitful and have grown and their business has prospered. And now they're getting in at age, and we're seeing this 68 to 75-year-old, business owner that's going, what am I going to do with this? A lot of my net worth's tied up here, and what am I going to do?
Yeah. As we were talking the other day, Greg, you mentioned also that many times the spouse has some thoughts about that, right?
Yes.
As they get faced with the possibility of.
Well, they have a vested interest, no question.
Yeah.
A lot of ladies, when they're looking at it, go, okay, if something happens to you, what do I do? And we have a lot of clients and prospective clients that come in that go, my life was great until my buddy George died. And now my wife is convinced that I'm not going to be here tomorrow. And she's very concerned about, all of our net worth, or a big portion of our net worth is tied up over in the business. She has no involvement with it. She doesn't know how to run it. And she's very concerned. It brings a lot of fear and anxiety for her. And, I need to figure out how to get this problem resolved. And, I don't want her to be unhappy. I don't want her to be concerned, but also I want to keep running the business, or I want to stay involved, or I want to see it pass on. I want to see the company continue, and so I want to look at what my options are.
Sure. Well, let's just sort of take it from the top then. How does one know when it's time to sell their business?
I think there's several things to think about. One could be just health concerns, with where are you? Are you having health issues? Secondly, do you think the business has peaked out with where it is? Does it need a lot of capital or some type of injection of capital for it to grow? Maybe it can't grow organically very quickly. Maybe the market is changing that it's in, but it could be that it's very profitable. Yeah. And right now, valuations are very high. It could be simply from that viewpoint that, can I get enough for it that it's time to take a payday?
Well, you talk about valuations being high. We had a client the other day who finally parted with their business for 11 times earnings. Is that the sort of valuations you see, or what typically could a business expect?
There range all over depending on the industry.
Okay.
Depending on, for instance, a service business is going to sell at some kind of multiple of revenue. Some kind of manufacturing distribution business, is probably going to sell at a multiple of EBITDA, and which is basically positive cash flow, which is earnings with adding back interest, depreciation, amortization, taxes, those types of items to get to what we'll call pure cash flow. It's some kind of multiple of that pure cash flow or EBITDA number. But you can find a lot of cases where if the margins aren't real good in the business, the multiple is going to come down. If there is a huge amount of growth and maybe a large annuity stream with a greater margin, then the multiple is going to be higher. So to answer your question, we see a lot of stuff that ends up somewhere between 5 to 7, or if you're in like tech or some of the other areas, or you've got a new disruptive type technology, it can certainly go up to 11, 15. It also can depend on who the buyer is. If the buyer is a strategic that is looking at this as a bolt-on, they're looking at it that they're not going to have some of the overhead that you're going to have. They're literally looking at your customer base and cherry picking some of your employees and who they want over the next couple of years. That allows them to have a lot more latitude in terms of what they're looking for. They also have a longer term hold than the typical private equity group does. Private equity group is going to be probably a 5 to 7 year term of a hold, and that's simply because their fund only has a 10-year life. So they're going to look at it in terms of how quickly can we make it grow, and that multiple is going to be lower. They're also going to require management to stay around. So there's a lot of different variables in there that cause that valuation to move up and down. One of the other things to think about when am I ready to sell is just how clean is your company? Is it really ready to sell?
Yeah.
You know, we have the old joke about, do we need to put lipstick on the pig, to really get it ready? We hope that we don't have to do that, for clients.
Right.
But everybody seems to need some kind of cleanup a little bit. But, just basic things. Are your accounting records in good condition? Can you stand up to the due diligence and what's known as a quality of earnings report, things like that need to be done as part of the whole purchase process?
Well, what I hear you saying is that beauty is still in the eye of the beholder.
Oh, it is. It's your baby. And, and we always laugh that we warn our clients that you're going to get your feelings hurt a little bit in this process because people are going to be critical of your company. And we laugh that, they're going to tell you your baby's ugly sometimes and go, you got this problem, you got this problem. And, and it's kind of like going to the doctor sometimes and you need to go, but you're fearful of the news that they're going to give you. It's a lot the same process, but you have to understand what the ultimate reward is and how do you prepare. If you spend maybe a year or 6 months or whatever it is, making sure you're ready. And there's a process we put our clients through when we represent them in a sale to make sure we're ready and to make sure that we know and they know what all the different surprises might be so that they don't end up getting asked hard questions without really good answers.
Sure. And it is a negotiation process, right?
Absolutely.
I think that anybody who's about to sell their business needs to know the negotiation started when the first phone call came in, right?
Yeah, and a lot of times it'll happen where what'll really bring this to the table is they'll get an unsolicited offer from somebody that just calls. We have our people calling where we're doing buy side for people, and we call companies all the time going, would you like to sell? And sometimes when that kind of lightning bolt strikes, people go, it's kind of an aha moment, and they go, well, maybe this is something to think about. And, let's sit down and discuss this and talk about, what the value is and where we go. And I think that's the most important piece to us. We believe that you always start with where's the value? What's going to happen with the company? What do we think it's really worth? And then also, what is, there's other things that play in called enterprise value, which basically means when you sell the company, much to a lot of people's chagrin, if someone offers you $5 or $10 million to the company, that's not the actual cash price you're going to walk with. Companies are sold on a debt-free, cash-free basis, so that sales price gets adjusted for those two numbers. And then, of course, the tax man cometh, and
the tax man cometh.
Yes, and he shows up and takes his share, and then there's the net dollars left, and you have to figure out, can you live off the earnings and the yield from those dollars? And a lot of times we find clients going, that doesn't work for me. Well, that's where you go, okay, then the sales price is too low. We need to put you on a different track to get you ready to sell. Maybe we've got to go find you some capital and grow your company rather than sell your company and make some changes in terms of where you're going.
Well, you mentioned growth, and you also sort of allude to timing, and timing is a big part of all this as well. How important is the growth component in the story that you ultimately put together?
Well, it certainly makes it a much more compelling story. But we find people that have all kinds of scenarios. We have, a family right now that two brothers started a company. One of them has dementia. They're growing, but slowly, but they need to exit. We find people that are terminally ill, and something has to happen because the spouse or the family member or the family is so entrenched in the company. We also find things where mom and dad may have passed away and left the stock in trust, and one of the children children wants it, the others just want mailbox money, and they just want the dollars invested in the trust and get a check. And, so there are all these different scenarios that are out there. Timing is important depending on what the situation is with each client. But the typical process is in a minimum of 4 to 6 month process to get through to sell a company, from the time you start. And it can be even a longer time period if you got to clean the company up or you got to do some things to get it fixed.
Sure. We've talked in the past about companies that find themselves overly dependent on a particular customer, or overly dependent on perhaps a particular key executive. What are some things that companies can do and should be thinking about in order to ensure that whenever the question comes, hey, are you really all about one or two customers, that you can really answer that? How do you sort of position the story?
You first off is you basically fess up to the fact that you probably have a customer concentration, or maybe a supplier. It could be a supplier concentration. You could have.
So you're saying transparency is a big part of this.
It is, absolutely. You have to figure that out and kind of put those pieces up on the table and go, these are the things we're going to have to figure out how we respond to and what we do. It could be some kind of intellectual property. It could be that maybe you've had people help develop intellectual property, but you don't have employment agreements with them to keep them from having a claim on what you're doing. Could be the customer relationships that certain key employees have, and things like that. Lots of different issues like that you have to really look at. Could be the seasonality of the business. We have a company right now up in the North Dakota area that does a lot of really large government contracts and real specialized type equipment for aerospace. Well, their contracts may be 7 to 10 years, but sometimes those contracts all time out. And in this case, it's just the absolute perfect storm in that the owner basically is deceased now unexpectedly, and the company finds itself with contracts renewing, so it's at the low end of its ebb in terms of its revenue stream. But you can see where the pipeline could fill up and what could happen. A lot of cases too, when you have those kinds of situations, you begin to look at who is the best buyer, because it may very well be that it's not private equity, because private equity is going to want management to stay. The typical strategic is going to go, I may or may not need you because I've got operating companies over here and I'm ultimately going to merge this entity in or create it as a division, and I've got people who can run it, do the marketing, operate it, make sure the manufacturing, distribution, whatever it takes, that understand the business. So it just depends on the situation.
Greg, I think what I'm hearing you say is that, first of all, you have to be honest with yourself about where your company is in the evolutionary process, with clients, with employees, with technologies, and so forth. And so you really have to understand that. But secondarily, you have to be prepared with an answer and a game plan to deal with those vulnerabilities that you have identified within your own company.
Absolutely.
Because they're certainly going to get pointed out to you during the process of due diligence,
yes,
right?
Because the people that are buying are professional buyers. I mean, you think about the fact that this is what they do every day, and we laugh and tell our clients this is not a level playing field. Okay, you can certainly get skinned in this game, and and not everybody who's trying to buy your company, they've got a side and a deal that they want to cut, and not everybody is transparent and truthful, and and you just want to be very careful about how you approach the process.
Sure. You mentioned a little earlier, Greg, the fact that sometimes in some situations they like for management to stay around. Perhaps there's an earn-out agreement or some sort of 3 to 5 year game plan for having management be engaged for the sake of continuity and so forth. And sometimes they'd rather see management out the door quickly. How do you know which type of buyer you should be looking for?
I think it depends on whether you want to really keep your employees around, whether some of them would like to stay involved in the process. A lot of people, whenever they want to sell the company, one of the key issues is, I want to take care of my people. I want to make sure that they're taken care of. We've had companies where 4 different generations in the family were involved in the business. What Gen 1 and Gen 4, were looking for were 2 totally different things. Gen 1 wanted to retire, and the only way they were going to be able to do that was sell part of the company. Gen 4, on the other hand, was going, I want to work another 10 plus years. I like the company. I want to actually own a piece. I'd like to roll forward with it. It's all those kinds of things that need to be laid out to a buyer up front so that they can understand what is it that the company's really looking for, what's management expecting. Also, it has to do with whether you have stock grants, where they're vested, what people are willing to do with those, how you can negotiate that process, and then just generally, does the buyer really need the people that are there? And if so, who do they need? And how do you prepare for that? And what do you do? I find some owners, when they find that people are going to be departing, maybe they're like, we need this senior level of management with these relationships, but we've got the operational people. They will then make sure that there's some kind of a form of a stock vesting program or something that allows those people to take some chips off the table, or maybe even just have a simple severance process that works to make sure that everybody's taken care of. One of the key things too when you're thinking about selling your company is making sure that it's not just the dollars the owner's going to take home, but are there enough dollars to take care of everyone that needs to be taken care of? Because there can be family members, there can be all types of different relationships out there with management, operational people, and a lot of people have been with private companies for 10, 20, 30, 40 years.
Well, and you make a really good point. Many of these businesses are family-owned businesses. And so there are often family members who have a different set of objectives. And so that discussion that needs to take place, that transparency needs to take place inside the family as well, right? I mean, they need to have some of those difficult conversations about what each party is really looking for in the scenario.
Well, and we talk about all the time that probably 80% of the process of selling a company is psychology.
Oh, wow.
And the reason for that is getting all the parties to understand, how do you work together? What are the family dynamics? Is there a sibling rivalry that exists? I always laugh and tell the story about, that somebody that mom and dad may be gone and the kids own part of it, and now they find themselves in a position where, what do I do? And, it's kind of, you tore the leg off my teddy bear, when I was a little kid, and mom and dad, and I'm still mad,
Those
and mom and dad
linger.
are gone, and now the gloves are going to come off and I'm going to make you pay. I met with an investment advisor this week that dad has passed away. The kids are running the company. One of them's not involved. 2 of them are. They don't have equal ownership. And mom is now getting involved with the process of selling and everything. And she suddenly decided everybody ought to be equal.
Oh, wow.
And that's not setting well with just the other 2 that have been in the company. They're going, wait a minute, I worked all these years, I did all this, this was my piece, and now I'm going to carve off and just hand part of it over here. And we were discussing, how do you have that conversation with a parent, whether it's paternal or maternal, that I don't like this process. And that's sometimes where it's easier for us as an intermediary, both with the family, not just the seller and the buyer, to sit down and say, let's talk about this. What do we do? We had in a fintech company we sold about a year ago, we had a father and son. The son had decided in college, because he couldn't pay a traffic ticket online, he had decided that he wanted to write some software. He did. His father was an attorney. He funded the company. So the dad had all the capital. The kid was the one working it. They'd grown it up. It was a $25, $30 million revenue company. And they didn't agree at all on what was going to happen at sale. The dad just wanted his money. The kid wanted to stay, wanted to be involved, wanted to do some things. And I think he finally actually decided that he needed to find a new partner. And that was really what it boiled down to in the discussion. It was a sale of the company, but it was really about finding him a new partner.
Yeah. Well, and this idea of passing the torch along to the next generation, As you're thinking about the possibility of another generation taking over the company, you talk about third and fourth generation perhaps, and we're seeing a lot of that as well. When you are thinking about that, what are some of the considerations that the senior patriarch or whatever might think about as they're thinking about passing the torch to their children?
Well, I think first off are they competent to run the company?
Yeah.
Can they run it without, I'm going to call it parental oversight, okay? And that is always something that comes up a lot of times, especially when stock is ended up in the trust and mom and dad are both gone, and maybe there's one child that's been running things. Are they really capable of running it? And the second piece is, whoever's going to be running it or stepping in, can they get along with all the other investors and all the other partners in the deal? I mean, we have several companies.
Personality matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we'll call it whatever rub may have created. Sometimes you find that there's cousins and uncles and distant relatives. We have a company here in Dallas right now that we're going to be working with, and then the patriarch is going to die in the next couple of years. He's terminally ill. There's 62 heirs that own part of this company. And granted, it's a very large company. There's plenty there. But we already know that some people are getting ready and hiring law firms and getting ready for a fight, and and you hope it doesn't get to that point. But sometimes the disagreements are just so, and the views are so disparaged until you can't find an easy solution. It takes a number of professionals getting in a room without the family members to figure out what things can be done, and that's where you need a number of different competent people around the table.
Well, and you mentioned the fact that 62 partners and that sort of thing. We can never forget the bank as a partner either, right? And so, as you think about the impact that it might have on the covenants, the banking covenants, or the lending relationships or the credit lines, what are some of the potential impacts that can happen when a patriarch is passing that business along to the next generation?
Well, first and foremost is just who's the guarantor on the debt. Almost every company has some form of a line of credit, some kind of capex type term debt, maybe a building they financed, whatever. And typically the majority shareholder is a guarantor in the debt. That's just a regulatory requirement nowadays in the banking world. So you have to determine what's going to happen with the guarantee. How's that going to happen? Because the bank really is a partner from that viewpoint.
Well, and you make a good point. There will still be a guarantor.
There will be.
That doesn't
Somebody's
go away.
Yes.
Just because you're passing it along to the next generation doesn't mean that someone's not going to hold the ultimate responsibility for the debt, right?
And to your comment, we are passing a torch. It's still burning.
Yeah.
And it's got fire on the other end of it. And but someone has to guarantee.
If the business is alive and viable.
And that is the reason sometimes companies sell, is that people go, I'm not comfortable with taking on the debt, or I don't feel like I could operate it, but I don't know that I can meet the covenants and the requirements and the things that go on to make everybody happy. And that is one of the things you have to think about when you're running a company and you're basically handing the torch off, is are the employees going to like it? Are the other investors, family members, partners, are they going to like it? Is the bank going to like it? Because we find, like in trust situations, a lot of times, whoever the corporate trustee is that's holding the stock will come to us and go, okay, this young man wants to own the company. Mom and dad have been running it with him. They're no longer around. And, we're going to hire you to help him finance it, but we're going to want to put a board in place. We're going to want to put a CFO alongside him, or we're going to bring some management along. We're going to want regular required meetings and reporting so we can make sure that somebody doesn't fly it into the side of the mountain and it hurt everybody.
Right.
And so there are some checks and balances have to be put in place. And I think as you're passing the torch, making sure you're communicating and asking people, do you want that responsibility? Are you really interested in stepping up to that?
Well, and you mentioned early on the psychology involved in all of this. And as you said, sometimes the third, fourth, second generation is not prepared for the level of risk that the original founder took on.
Right.
And so the psychology inside of, can they really work in that environment once perhaps their name is on the credit line, or they are truly at risk for the first time. Perhaps they've been operating as an employee up to this point in
Correct.
reality.
And you know, one way to deal with that, and this is back to our original conversation about getting the company ready to sell,
Sure.
is perhaps taking that, I'm going to call it knighted or selected person, pulling them up and letting them operate alongside the person who's the CEO or president, maybe elevating them to president, giving them responsibilities. You know, we were discussing this morning, my wife and I were about a board and an executive director and how things were working. And I was asking her the question about someone. I said, so how long has this person been the executive director of this organization? She said, 4 years. I said, so after 4 years, don't we have enough experience with this person to know whether they can make the right decisions, whether instead of micromanaging them, we can give them tasks and let them bring back options? And that's what I think you do with people internally in a company, is you start thinking years in advance, how do I prepare for the transition? This gets the person comfortable. And you think of it in terms of a quarterback of an NFL team or something like that. You don't just walk from sitting in this boardroom out to being Tom Brady and being the quarterback and throwing touchdowns. There are years of preparing for whatever role someone steps into, and helping people prepare and get ready for things like that is a big part of passing the torch. Now, the flip side of all of that is when you nominate who's going to pass the torch, you've got to make sure everybody else understands surprises don't work well. It doesn't matter who it is. And I laugh and tell people that. As a CEO, I don't get up every day going, oh boy, I can't wait to see what blows up in front of my face today. You hope that you have enough really good people around you and that they understand the plan. And this comes to a strategic plan as to where are we going as a family? What are we doing? And that's what started the conversation this morning about the board, was they were having a discussion of a strategic plan.
Well, and I think many times, particularly in a family-owned business, the decision-making may have been very centralized in the past.
Yes.
And as they're thinking about the future of the company, they need a more decentralized sort of approach to the leadership of the organization. They need to have a team of really solid individuals who are leading various departments within the company and so forth. And so for the patriarch, or for the heir or whomever, they need to be thinking about who else inside this organization can help fill out this team. Because as that business evolves, it may need a more solid and more depth on the bench, if you will, than it did in the early days, right?
And it may be, too, that you have to go outside the company to bring in that talent.
Sure.
Because let's go back to the example. If you're looking at the purchase price and enterprise value and you go, I don't like that number, and we decide we got to grow, then you've got to change the whole objective and go, okay, maybe if you are the patriarch or you're the CEO and you've been running it and you own 100% and nobody in the family is really involved, you may need to bring a president or CFO or a chief marketing person alongside you to really begin to prepare yourself, not only to be able to grow, but be able to have somebody to hand it off to, because what that does is it creates additional value in the company.
Right.
It solves one of the ugly questions that you have to deal with, is what happens if. And one of the things is, we're all, there's a mortality for all of us. And what happens if you're not here? How does the company function? Making sure that you have the right people that can step in, that the customer relationships aren't so tied to one individual, that the manufacturing relationships, the banking relationship, all these, I'm going to call it, key relationships in a company are where they've been adjusted, they're handed off, and you've done this over a period of time, and you really get ready, which kind of, I guess, goes back to our original comment. Getting ready can be a multi-year, long-term process.
Sure. Many times, our objective inside of these situations is to really get their entire management team, first of all, the right people, settled in the right places, and many times that may mean moving some people around in the organization. But secondarily, getting them accustomed to the responsibility of knowing what the numbers look like inside the organization, getting them accustomed to really thinking like the business owner. And you mentioned, this idea of driving the marketability or the valuation of the company up by making these sorts of preparation or making these sorts of decisions before you actually get to that moment when they begin to put the true value on the company itself, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of cases it's also things like just letting people see financial statements, being transparent about what's going on, sharing that information.
Yeah.
But it can truly be one where you're getting people involved, at a lot of different levels and letting them really learn to carry the ball.
Well, and what we see a lot is that a lot of employees inside an organization maybe really don't even know how the company makes money.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
I mean, they may see their small piece of the entity and they may think that that's the key driving portion of the business, but really understanding what is it that is profitable for this company and what's not profitable. All of those are things that people have to come to understand over some period of time, which goes back to your idea of preparation. Along the way.
And you have to train your management group just like you would any other new employee to step to that level. You also have to be prepared for the fact that some people really aren't going to like it and they're going to leave.
Yeah.
Change isn't just selling the company. Change is getting it ready. Change is people leaving. Change may be finding another lender. Change may be doing a lot of different things. You may need to buy out other partners before you get the company ready to sell. There's a lot of different changes that you have to address depending on where you think the company is and where it needs to be.
Oh, we love change, don't we?
Yeah. I don't know anybody that likes change, and it can be fun. And it can be planned.
Sure.
I think it's when we go back, there's a difference between it surprise and change.
Right.
And I tell people change in a lot of cases can be something that's planned for. If someone walks in and tells you you're terminated, today's the last day on your job, and you've been there 20 or 30 years, that's not change that you like. Hopefully you would have seen it coming or know something. And that's what we're talking about, is preparing people for what's going to happen so that there shouldn't be some huge surprises. And hopefully you can work this through in a stair-step kind of process that's very, I'm going to call it strategic again, and very laser in terms of what it's done. So the last thing you want to do is wreck the organization that you're trying to grow it up and make it more profitable.
Well, we've talked a little bit about transparency. And at the same time, who knows what when is a really important question to ask as well, right? Who do we make aware? Who do we not make aware of some of the changes that are coming? And so I think it's a judgment call. There's some balancing there that needs to take place. But let's talk just a little bit about the importance of two things. One, keeping your eye on the business while you're going through this process. You and I talked the other day, and you said you've just taken on 2 full-time jobs.
Yeah.
But keeping your eye on the business, but also keeping relatively quiet in certain stages of the process.
And we find a lot of clients that go, I'm not comfortable with telling everybody. I want to keep this process until the very end, and that's okay. That's certainly because they know the dynamic of their people and what they want to do. But to your comment that we were talking about the other day, when you're running this process, you're truly trying to satisfy all the questions, all the things that come up in due diligence. At the same time, you're trying to run your company, trying to keep your customers in place, trying to keep your management in place. And and I've always told people, if you're comfortable, the best place to start is having the discussion with your spouse, with your family, with those close, with the idea of confidentiality. It may also be that you want to put employment agreements in place, address this whole sharing of, here's what I'm thinking. I want to share some of this with you. And by the way, as part of that, there's going to be non-disclosure agreements and stuff like this. It's working through those processes with people. But again, it's a very specific type of entity, and it's different for every entity. And
Sure.
it's different because the personalities and the people and the strengths and the knowledge and the makeup of family versus non-family, But I will tell you, in a lot of cases, senior management in a closely held company becomes like family. And that's part of what goes on with a lot of people is they go, how do I deal with this? I don't want to be greedy. On the other hand, how do I take care of everybody and what do I do?
Right.
And we have a lot of clients that we're working through that are 4 or 5 years out that are giving away stock grants and doing things like that, putting buy-sell type life insurance in place and tools like that to help to give the company liquidity in the case that something does happen, or to be able to buy stock back from people and do things like that to reward people.
Well, and taking care of them financially is one way to take care of them, but also ensuring that they have the right skills to maintain the business once the patriarch or some of those initial founders are out. Really a critical part of the equation as well, right?
Yes.
Because they have to, at that point, they're going to have to fend for themselves. If there's a private equity group involved and they can't run the company effectively, it'll be a very short-term relationship.
Absolutely.
And so preparing people with those skills, with that understanding of the business, with all of those tools that they'll need to survive, those basic survival skills, big part of the responsibility of ownership as you're getting ready to hand this off.
And making sure that those people, have, like you said, not only the skills, but they understand what life's going to be like the day after the transaction closes. We tell people all the time, do not misunderstand that private equity people are in search of a certain kind of yield, and they're looking for that. And how they know how to deal with that is they cut cost. A lot of instances can't generate a dollar's worth of revenue. That's not what they know how to do, but they know how to cut cost. A strategic, on the other hand, may have a lot of politics and internal issues that you've never been involved with or had to deal with. You've lived in your own world. And to your comment, preparing people and making sure they understand and having those things out on the table as deals are being looked at to make sure that the company stays or that the employees are able to stay and continue to work. A lot of the issues that we see in the marketplace today that damage companies, 50% of them come from a failed integration. And what I mean by that is that people will try and buy a company, merge it in or operate it with their company, and for whatever reason, people, software, technology, customers,
Culture,
quality controls, whatever it may be, it fails because of that. And and sometimes you look back and you go, oh, how did they miss that? This was so simple. But again, it's thinking through all those things. So that's again why we say it takes months and months to go through this, because there's a lot of really small things that have to be hashed out in this process to make it work well.
Sure. I can remember one merger where we brought together two different companies with two very different cultures. One company had always been at a premium to the marketplace. They had always price their services accordingly. The other company was the low-cost provider. In bringing two very disparate cultures together may or may not be a good idea.
Absolutely. And it at least gives it a greater potential for failure.
Sure.
Just because there are hurdles and processes you have to get over and things you have to address. And that, how are we going to market and who we're going to market to? And it may be simply that we're going to keep two divisions separate in some cases and go, I'm not going to try and put a square peg in a round hole. I'm going to make it work differently because I want, and maybe I'm over here and I'm a high-end luxury type provider, but I need to really grow. I need this other piece. I need the lower end discounted type cost. Well, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. Yeah. And so you continue to operate it and you leave it, but somewhere up here at the top, there's somebody who understands how the puzzle fits together. And that's really what they're working on.
Sure. Well, Greg, we've talked about a lot of different things today. We've talked about the psychology involved. We've talked about the importance of preparation. We've talked about the importance of transparency. We've talked about the importance of having the right judgment at the right time. We've talked about the importance of bringing in advisors who have been through this many times to help step through it crisply. What haven't we talked about today? What is left for us to touch on for our listeners?
I would say it's probably a real key thing called how do you get to the EBITDA number?
Wow.
And a lot of people, and I say a lot of people, we who run our companies, we all run expenses through our company that are really our choice. And I'll throw out some things: automobiles, airplanes, hunting leases, my suite at American Airlines Center, travel, trips with clients, all the things that go
Vacations.
through there. Yes. Or even we call it the ugly side. A big special litigation expense that you maybe have had that you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on, a one-off type situation. All kinds of things that we call as one-offs. We have to get the client to back up and look at their numbers again and really focus and go, what are the we call them add backs? What are the things that we're going to pull out of those numbers that we're going to justify and make the argument that these are adjustments to EBITDA? Because what you're doing at that point is you're causing that EBITDA number to go up and arguing that if you're running the company and I'm not running the company, you're not going to run those expenses through it. And so consequently, you need to look at that. And it can be also things just as simple as the amount of compensation that a CEO takes. He basically, from a tax viewpoint, looks, if I'm going to pay tax over here, I'm going to take it. I'm going to pay tax myself. I'm going to take the income and I'll put it back in the company if I need to. The entity that buys it may go, we're only going to pay that CEO half or a quarter of what you have. So there could be some add backs and things as simple as compensation. And those could be, also family members that you go, I know I employ my brother-in-law over here, but you're not going to want him. And, he's not really worth having. And, and so we're going to treat him as an add back because I know you're going to get rid of him. And, there are all kinds of things like that. And we laugh, we call it relatives, toys, playthings, one-offs, and those are things on the very, very front end that have to be focused on because a lot of times they're buried in the numbers and they're buried very effectively, and so it's a matter of making sure, because that EBITDA number is the core cornerstone to have this whole conversation of value.
Yeah, I think that you make a really good point because people oftentimes spend a lot of time talking about the multiple. But it's the multiple of what, right?
Yes.
And so to the extent that you can really boost the EBITDA, then the multiple becomes less the focus.
Yes.
But you get to the end result.
Yes.
Much more effectively.
And sometimes we laugh that we do reverse math, to your comment, is what do you want the value to be and can I get there? And there's, as you say, there's two ways. There's the multiple, but there's also the add backs. And there may be arguments too about I have a customer that you'll never get because I have that customer locked. And if you want that relationship, that you have to buy us. Well, there can be value to a concentration and a customer that's locked in under a long-term contract.
Absolutely. Well, Greg, you've been very insightful this morning, and we appreciate very much your time and your thoughts today. Any last things that you'd like to share with the viewers?
So I would just tell you that if you're contemplating a sale, maybe the only thing would be to start thinking way ahead. Don't wait till the year of or till you get really ill or something happens. I think it's one of those things like estate planning that you have to think about it, you draft it, you put it on the shelf, but you keep taking it off the shelf and you keep working with it. It's a static, moving type environment. And I think that's the thing I would encourage people is to find your advisors, sit down. If they can't help you, find someone who can. Sure. I really appreciate you giving me the chance to talk. Sure. As you can tell, we're passionate. We love what we do. We enjoy doing this every day. To us, it's about solving those problems, helping people find their way, and holding their hand through the process to where they get to the end and there's a big smile on their face and they go, I couldn't have gotten there without the team around me. And to us, that's the really important and the real blessing that you get to give people.
Absolutely. Having them look you in the eye and say, couldn't have done it without you.
Absolutely.
Greg, we couldn't have done it without you this morning.
Thank
you very much.
Well, thank you.